People in these narcissistic and they're predatory, and they can take somebody and cut them off from everybody and steal every cent they have and kill
Yeah. Yeah.
them. I'm
So
just,
there's
yeah,
you mentioned the reality testing and breaking the reality test,
yeah,
and now you've said cutting people off as well. It seems
yeah.
that isolation has a role to play too.
Hmm.
Does the isolation need to come first and make the reality test breaking easier, or do you break the reality test so it's easier to isolate someone? How
It's
does
a
that go?
combination, and I guess I mentioned earlier, people are really into gaslighting, and what uh, what gaslighting is there was an old play in Britain, and then it got made into a movie, and then it was a movie in the U.S. And right now, I'm forgetting, is it Catherine Hepburn? Anyway, I'm spacing the stars. It's a very popular movie, and it's a movie about a kind of a ne'er-do-well husband who wants to drive his wife crazy, make her think she's going crazy. So what he does is he goes up in the attic and he makes some noise with chains. And she's like, "What's going on in the attic?" He's like, "Nothing. Are you crazy? Everything's fine." And then he goes and turns the gas lights down. She's like, "Who's messing with the gas lights?" "Nobody. Are you crazy? What's wrong with you?" And by doing that over time, he undermines his wife's sense of reality testing or her ability to test reality. And once you cut people off from their ability to know what's real and what's not, they're very easy to control. So you're cutting them off from their ability to connect to reality, and then you control them. So gaslighting somebody is essentially making them distrust their own grasp on reality, and then they lean on you as the source of truth.
So with that pathological 2%, it seems things like this and other forms of abuse are common, prevalent in these relationships, would you say?
Yes,
So what does the abuse look like in those relationships?
it's I'll tell you, it can go from more psychological abuse to where it's, I'm just lying to you and you feel uncomfortable and you kind of know I'm cheating, but you're sort of staying around because you don't have a better option, or you don't think you have a better option. And I think at the more extreme, it can become physical and controlling, where you become physically abusive. I mean, I hate talking about this stuff because it's so depressing, but it's a real thing where you can have a very controlling spouse, and often it's men who are doing this. They're physically stronger, so they can be more physically violent, and they end up controlling their wife and belittling her. So they basically break somebody psychologically, so they don't think they have any options, with a combination of physical violence. Sometimes you alternate physical violence with like love. Anyway, I'm like, again, I don't like even telling people how to do this. It's basically like torture. So you can find physical abuse and assault and really dark things like that, theft. I mean, you can find some real horrible things if you want to look for it.
Well, let's talk a little more about the gaslighting then, since you're more comfortable with that. Um,
Sorry, yeah, I mean,
I get
I'll
you.
tell you, I mean, people in these narcissistic and they're predatory, and they can take somebody and cut them off from everybody and steal every cent they have and kill
Yeah. Yeah.
them. I'm
So
just,
there's
yeah,
you mentioned the reality testing and breaking the reality test,
yeah,
and now you've said cutting people off as well. It seems
yeah.
that isolation has a role to play too.
Hmm.
Does the isolation need to come first and make the reality test breaking easier, or do you break the reality test so it's easier to isolate someone? How
It's
does
a
that go?
combination, and a place you see this really clearly is if you go out of like romantic relationships and look at cults,
Mm,
because a cult will have a narcissistic leader who's having sexual relationships with many of the people, and part of cults is control with talking to family. So most
mm,
cults you enjoy, they say, yeah, you can't talk to anybody who's not in the cult. If you talk to your family and they're not in it, you have to cut off from your family. Or if you go visit, if their family visits, you have to talk to them with another cult member present. So what they do is they try to isolate you from anyone who's going to give you a different view of reality. So that's part of the process of onboarding you into a cult. And the same with a relationship. It's like they bring you into a relationship and then they start cutting you off from your family. They start cutting you off from your friends because you're easier to control that way.
So if someone were an orphan, let's say they didn't have a like a biological family to go to begin with, grew up in foster care or something, didn't even have foster parents to sort of connect back to, th those people especially vulnerable.
That's an interesting question. And I don't have any actual research data on it, so I'm just speculating. That kind of childhood could produce a couple different kinds of attachment. One could be more anxious,
Hmm.
and in that case, you'd probably be more vulnerable. But a lot of kids going through that kind of environment develop what we call a dismissing or an avoidant attachment style, where they learn to become very independent and very self-regulating. So they're not so much at risk. They have trouble forming relationships with really anybody. They can have trouble just attaching to anybody, but they're less likely, I think, to be targets if they have a real strong sort of defensive, dismissive style.
Okay.
But the avoidance stuff, I mean, if you grow up, you got family, father issues, you got mother issues or something, you're looking for love.
Mm.
You didn't get it when you were a kid. That makes you at risk.
I
There's
see.
a reason dads tell their daughters they love them every single day, and they make that a number one priority. It keeps them from being, yeah,
You have two, right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And they,
You know.
every day
Yeah,
until they turn it, every day I tell them I love them because they
yeah,
got to know.
yeah, absolutely. That was a clip from my interview with Professor Keith Campbell. Watch the full episode using the link in the description or the box on the screen.